The wind moved slowly across the broken plains, carrying the smell of ash and hot stone. Far above, the sky trembled as if it already knew what was coming. No banners marked the camps. No songs rose from the soldiers preparing for battle. This was not a war meant for glory. It was a war fought because there was no other choice. Among the ranks stood Hades, not yet the Dark Lord poets would one day fear, but a commander shaped by silence. He did not pace like Zeus, nor shout orders like Poseidon. He watched. His eyes followed the movement of troops, the way the ground cracked beneath their feet, the way fear crept into even immortal faces. War had a sound, he knew it well. The distant grinding of earth, the soft clink of armor, the unsteady breath before combat. These sounds mattered more than speeches. The soldiers under his command were not celebrated. They were born of stone and shadow, warriors drawn from the depths of the earth where light never reached. Their armor was dark, forged from metals pulled from volcanic veins. When they moved, the ground answered. One of them tightened his grip on a spear and whispered a prayer he knew no god would hear. Another checked the edge of his blade, his hand steady despite the dread settling in his chest. "They say the Titans will break us by morning," one soldier murmured. "Let them try," came the reply low and hard. "The ground listens to us." Hades passed among them, his presence calm but heavy. He stopped beside a young warrior whose breathing had grown fast and shallow. "Fear keeps you alive," Hades said quietly, "but panic will kill you. Remember your position. Trust the earth. It will do the rest." There was no promise of survival in his words, only truth. Far across the plain, the Titans gathered, massive figures of fire and stone, their footsteps shaking the horizon. Kronos had ordered a dawn assault, believing overwhelming force would crush the Olympians before they could fully unite. The Titans laughed as they prepared, hurling chunks of rock at the sky, confident that youth and discipline would shatter against ancient power. As night deepened, Hades descended underground. Torches flickered along narrow tunnels carved weeks before, hidden beneath layers of reinforced stone. Supply routes branched like veins. Trap chambers lay sealed, waiting. The soldiers followed him without question, the sound of boots echoing softly. If they breached the surface lines, a lieutenant asked, "Do we hold?" Hades shook his head. "We draw them in." The lieutenant hesitated. "And if the tunnels collapse?" "Then we adapt," Hades replied. War does not forgive rigid thinking. At first light, the world exploded. The Titans charged, their war cries tearing through the sky. Fire rained down, igniting the plains. Olympian forces met them with lightning and steel, the clash sending shockwaves through the air. Screams mixed with thunder. The smell of burning earth filled every breath. Then Hades raised his hand. The signal moved through the ranks like a pulse. Deep below, mechanisms released. The ground beneath the Titans cracked open with a thunderous roar. Entire formations vanished as the earth swallowed them whole. Titans fell into darkness, their shouts cut short as stone closed around them. Panic rippled through the Titan army. Orders were lost. Lines broke. They had prepared for lightning and blades, not for the ground itself to turn against them. Underground, the fighting was brutal and close. Echoes of steel striking stone rang through the tunnels. Dust choked the air. A soldier slammed into a wall, barely avoiding a Titan's crushing fist. Another was dragged into the shadows, his screams swallowed by the earth. Hades moved through the chaos with precision. He gave no chase driven by rage, no reckless commands. Every motion had purpose. When a tunnel collapsed, he rerouted forces without hesitation. When resistance stiffened, he ordered withdrawal that lured the enemy deeper into the maze. Above ground, Zeus felt the shift. The battle no longer followed the patterns he understood. Victory was no longer measured by territory taken, but by how many simply disappeared. As night fell again, the battlefield grew quiet. Fires smoldered where armies had stood that morning. Survivors gathered in stunned silence. Some Olympian soldiers stared at the ground beneath their feet, unsure whether to feel safe or afraid. A wounded Titan, dragged from collapsed trench, whispered through cracked lips, "He doesn't kill us. He takes us away." The word spread faster than any rumor. Fear changed shape. Death was no longer the worst fate. Hades stood at the edge of the field, listening to the wind move through broken stone. He knew this was only the beginning. The war would grow darker, deeper, more unforgiving. And when it ended, someone would have to rule what remained. He turned back toward the shadows, already planning the next descent. The night after the first great clash felt heavier than the battle itself. Smoke hung low over the ruined plains, blurring the stars until even the heavens seemed uncertain. Fires crackled where fallen weapons lay scattered, their glow revealing bodies half buried in ash and stone. Soldiers moved quietly among the wreckage, speaking in murmurs, as if the ground itself might be listening. Hades stood apart from the camps, his gaze fixed on the fissures torn open during the fighting. From below came faint echoes, distant groans, shifting rock, the slow settling of the earth after violence. Each sound was a reminder that the war was no longer fought only in the open. It had descended into the depths, where fear traveled faster than armies. A messenger approached, armor dented, voice strained. The Titans are regrouping. They're fortifying the surface and sealing their own tunnels. They've learned. Hades nodded. Then they're afraid. Zeus wants a decisive strike, the messenger added. A show of strength. He believes the morale of our forces depends on it. Hades turned, eyes steady. Morale depends on survival. Tell him we cannot outshine the Titans in raw force. We must outlast them. The messenger hesitated, then bowed and left. Hades knew the tension growing among the Olympians. Zeus sought victory through spectacle, Poseidon through overwhelming assault. But this war would not be won in a single moment. It would be won in fragments through patience and pressure. At dawn, the Titans struck again, this time cautiously. Scouts advanced first, probing the ground with massive weapons, listening for hollows. Their movements were slower, their confidence fractured. Where they once charged without fear, now they advanced with suspicion, eyes fixed on the earth. Olympian forces met them with controlled resistance. Retreats were deliberate. Lines fell back step by step, drawing the Titans toward terrain Hades had chosen carefully. Rocky passes narrowed their formations. Volcanic vents released choking fumes when struck. The battlefield became a trap, disguised as chaos. A young Olympian soldier stumbled during the withdrawal, his foot caught between shattered stones. Panic surged as a Titan loomed overhead, shadows swallowing him whole. "Move!" a comrade shouted, dragging him free just as the Titan's weapon crashed down, splintering the ground where he had stood moments before. They ran, hearts pounding, until they reached the mouth of a hidden descent. Without time to question, they plunged into darkness. Underground, the fighting intensified. Torches flickered wildly as air currents shifted. The tunnels echoed with clashes of metal and stone, the sounds distorted and endless. Titans struggled to move in confined spaces, their size becoming a liability. Olympian and earthborn soldiers struck from narrow angles, vanishing into side passages before counterblows could land. One Titan bellowed in rage, slamming his fists into the walls. The ceiling cracked. "Fall back!" a lieutenant shouted. The tunnel collapsed in a deafening roar, sealing Titan and Olympian alike in stone and dust. Silence followed, thick and final. Above ground, the shock of subterranean collapses rippled through both armies. Dust plumes erupted without warning. Entire units vanished. The Titans began to argue among themselves, commanders accusing one another of leading them into death traps. The unity that had once defined their strength began to fracture. Hades observed from below, his mind calculating losses with cold precision. Every collapse carried a cost. Every trap claimed allies as well as enemies. This was the weight of command, the knowledge that survival demanded sacrifice. A veteran soldier approached him, blood streaking his armor. "We're losing men in the tunnels," he said bluntly. "Good ones." Hades met his gaze. "I know." "Then why continue?" "Because if we fight on the surface," Hades replied, "we lose everyone." The soldier nodded slowly, accepting the truth even as it hardened his expression. War offered no clean choices. By the third day, exhaustion gripped both sides. The Titans' assault slowed. Their once thundering charges had become cautious advances, interrupted by long pauses and shouted warnings. Fear had replaced fury. Every step was measured, every shadow suspected. Zeus unleashed a massive aerial assault, lightning tearing through the sky, forcing Titan forces to scatter. For a moment, it seemed the tide might turn in a single, brilliant strike. But Hades watched the aftermath carefully. The Titans retreated, but they did not break. They adapted. That night, Kronos ordered a counter-strategy. Titan engineers began collapsing their own underground routes, denying Hades the advantage of depth. The earth trembled under deliberate destruction, and for the first time, Hades felt the ground resist him. A low rumble echoed to the tunnels as a key passage caved in unexpectedly. Dust filled the air. Soldiers coughed, disoriented. Hades steadied himself, listening. The earth was shifting, angry, unstable. "We withdraw from this sector," he ordered. "Now!" The retreat was narrow and costly. One by one, soldiers slipped through falling debris, some not fast enough. Their cries faded as stone sealed behind them. Hades did not look back. He could not. When the dust finally settled, the battlefield fell into an uneasy stillness. Neither side claimed victory, yet something had changed. The Titans no longer advanced with certainty. The Olympians no longer believed speed and power alone would save them. Hades emerged from the depths as night returned, his armor scarred, his forces diminished but intact. Zeus approached, lightning flickering faintly around him. "You fight like the war will never end," Zeus said. Hades answered quietly, "Because it won't, for those who fall." Zeus said nothing. He looked across the ruined land, at the countless places where the earth had opened and closed again, and for the first time, he understood the cost of the path they had chosen. In the darkness below, the earth settled, holding its dead and its secrets, as the war pressed on toward an ending no one could yet see. By the fourth cycle of battle, the land itself seemed exhausted. Cracks veined the plains like old scars, and the air carried a constant tremor, as if the world braced for another wound. Soldiers no longer spoke of victory. They spoke of endurance, how long they could hold their ground, how long they could keep moving before fear or fatigue claimed them. Hades moved through the camps at dusk, listening more than he spoke. The wounded lay in rows, their breaths uneven, their eyes fixed on nothing. Some had lost limbs to falling stone, others to Titan blades. There were no healers powerful enough to erase such damage completely. Immortality did not mean invulnerability. Pain still lingered. Loss still mattered. A young officer approached, voice low. "Scouts report Titan movement near the eastern ridges. Smaller units. Fast." Hades frowned slightly. "They're learning to avoid mass formations." "Yes, and they're using fire to seal tunnel entrances before we can use them." Hades considered this. Adaptation was the mark of a dangerous enemy. Kronos was no fool. He was reshaping the war into something less predictable, something more desperate. That night, Hades gathered his commanders beneath a shattered outcrop, the sky glowing faintly red from distant fires. Maps were scratched into stone. Lines crossed and recrossed as strategies shifted. "We can't rely solely on the ground anymore," one commander argued. "They're cutting us off." "Then we change the ground," Hades replied. "If they deny us the depths, we deny them stability." At dawn, the Olympian forces launched a coordinated advance, not with overwhelming force, but with precise disruption. Zeus struck Titan watchposts from the air, lightning flashing like signal fires. Poseidon's forces surged along fractured riverbeds, flooding trenches and washing away defensive lines. And beneath it all, Hades' soldiers moved quietly, planting fractures where the earth was already weak. The Titans responded with brutal efficiency. Firestorms swept the plains, turning stone to molten rivers. Entire units were forced back, their armor glowing red-hot. Screams echoed as soldiers fell, consumed by heat or crushed by collapsing terrain. In the chaos, Hades found himself separated from his escort. Smoke blinded him, the roar of battle deafening. A Titan emerged through the haze, towering, eyes burning with fury. Its weapon came down in a sweeping arc. Hades barely stepped aside, the blow shattering rock where he had stood. He drew his blade, dark metal absorbing the light around it. The clash was close and savage. Each strike sent shock waves through the ground. The Titan laughed, confident in its strength. "You hide beneath the earth," it snarled. "You fear open war." Hades answered between blows, voice steady. "I fear wasted lives." He drove his blade into a fracture at the Titan's knee. Stone cracked. The Titan staggered, surprise flashing across its face before rage returned. With a final, desperate strike, Hades severed the support entirely. The Titan fell, its body crashing into broken ground, swallowed by the collapse. Silence followed, broken only by Hades' measured breathing. He looked down into the darkness where the Titan had vanished. There was no triumph in his expression, only resolve. Elsewhere, the battle turned unexpectedly. A Titan flanking force broke through Olympian lines near the southern pass, threatening to encircle Zeus' position. Messengers ran, shouting warnings over the din. Hades received the report moments later. Without hesitation, he redirected his remaining reserves, ordering a risky maneuver through partially collapsed tunnels. "If they fall in, we lose them," a captain warned. "If we don't move," Hades replied, "we lose the war." The descent was chaos. Rocks fell without warning. Dust choked the air. One soldier slipped, barely caught by another's grip. They moved forward anyway, driven by necessity more than courage. They emerged behind the Titan flanking force, just as it prepared to strike. The surprise was complete. Attacked from both sides, the Titans faltered. Zeus seized a moment, unleashing a concentrated storm that shattered their formation. By nightfall, the pass was secured, but the cost was heavy. The tunnel's use of the maneuver collapsed entirely, sealing in dozens of Olympian soldiers who had not made out in time. As the survivors regrouped, exhaustion gave way to anger. Some cursed Kronos, others cursed the ground. A few cursed Hades. A wounded soldier confronted him openly. "You sent them to die," he said, voice shaking. "You knew the tunnels wouldn't hold." Hades did not deny it. "I knew they might not." "And you chose anyway?" "Yes." The soldier looked away, tears cutting paths through the grime on his face. "Then remember their names." Hades placed a hand on his shoulder. "I will. All of them." That night, Hades stood alone near a newly formed chasm, staring into the depths. The earth below was crowded now, with fallen Titans, fallen Olympians, fragments of a war that refused to stay on the surface. He felt the weight of it pressing against him, shaping him into something darker, something necessary. The war was changing him, and deep within the shifting ground, the idea of a realm for the dead, ordered, contained, final, began to take clearer form. Above, the stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the cost being paid below. The battlefield lay shrouded in an eerie stillness before dawn, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and gunpowder. Soldiers huddled in the mud, their faces streaked with grime, sweat, and the terror of anticipation. Each man held tightly to his weapon, knuckles white, eyes darting at the slightest movement beyond the trench lines. The distant rumble of cannon fire echoed like the growl of a restless beast, a warning of what was to come. Private Callan pressed his back against the cold earth, listening intently. "Do you hear that?" he whispered to his comrade, Corporal Renwick. The crackle of distant musket fire and the shrill cries of the wounded carried across the valley. "It's Renwick replied, his voice taut with fear and resolve. "Time to make our mark." Above, the sky was a canvas of bruised purples and oranges, streaked with smoke from the earlier skirmishes. The enemy's cavalry approached like shadows in the dawn, their armor glinting faintly as they rode in synchronized lines, hooves pounding rhythmically against the soft earth. Archers took positions along the ridge, arrows notched and ready, the whispering tension of string against bow a silent prelude to the storm about to erupt. Captain Leontius strode along the trench, his boots sinking into the mud, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his helm. "Men," he called, his voice cutting to the murmur of anxious whispers. "Remember what we fight for. Our families, our lands, our honor." He paused, scanning their faces. "We are not mere pawns in the game of kings. We are the storm that breaks upon them." His words sparked murmurs of courage, fleeting flames in the shadow of fear. Suddenly, The ground shook as the enemy's artillery opened fire. Iron balls screamed through the air, smashing into the earth and sending geysers of mud and splintered wood into the sky. Soldiers threw themselves into trenches, clutching their ears, hearts pounding. Callan gritted his teeth, gripping his musket. "We hold," he muttered, almost to himself, the determination in his voice trembling but resolute, no matter the cost. Amidst the chaos, scouts reported a flanking maneuver on the enemy's right wing. Leontius's eyes narrowed. "Signal the archers. We draw them in." Flags waved, horns blared, and arrows rained down upon the advancing enemy. The first clash of steel rang out as infantry met cavalry, the shriek of metal on metal and the guttural cries of men and horses filling the valley with a nightmarish symphony. Callan found himself pressed against the chaos, striking down one soldier after another. Each clash carried a weight beyond mere survival. It was a fight for memory, for legacy, for the lives waiting beyond the smoke. Renwick fought beside him, their coordination born from sheer hardship. Every swing of sword and stab of bayonet a heartbeat in the pulse of war. "We make history today, Callan." Renwick shouted over the din, though whether he spoke of victory or survival, Callan could not tell. The battle ebbed and flowed, waves of assault meeting waves of resistance. In the distance, the enemy's general was visible atop a hill, waving his saber, rallying his men with a ferocity that mirrored their own. Leontius raised his own sword, signaling a countercharge. Drums beat a rhythm of defiance as soldiers surged forward, the earth trembling beneath hundreds of marching feet. Midday brought a lull, a strange pause in the violence that allowed for grim assessment. The valley was strewn with bodies, blood-soaked banners sagging in the smoke-choked air. Soldiers crouched behind battered walls, inhaling the scent of burnt powder and iron. Callan sat upon a ruined cart, pressing a rag to his bloodied arm. "How many more?" he murmured, voice hoarse, eyes scanning the horizon for the next wave of attack. Renwick knelt beside him, grim-faced. "Enough to make this valley a graveyard. But we hold. That's all that matters." The sun climbed high, turning the smoke and blood into a golden haze. The enemy had regrouped, preparing for another assault, but Leontius had anticipated their tactics. With a subtle signal, hidden artillery struck the flanks, sending the cavalry into disarray. Arrows and cannon fire converged, a deadly choreography that tore through enemy lines, leaving chaos in its wake. Soldiers roared in victory and despair. The line between the two blurred as men fell around them, some to enemy blades, others to the same artillery that had wrought havoc upon their foes. By evening, the valley bore the scars of relentless combat. Fires burned across the hillsides, casting flickering shadows that danced over the mud-caked soldiers. Survivors huddled together, nursing wounds and exhausted pride, the silence a temporary reprieve from the symphony of battle. Leontius walked among them, offering quiet words of encouragement, his armor scorched and dented, face streaked with soot. "Today we survived," he said softly. "Tomorrow we remember." Callan stared at the horizon, the fading light reflecting in his eyes. The battle was far from over, yet there was a sense of something deeper, an understanding of the cost they paid, not just in lives, but in spirit. "For every man who fell," he whispered, "we carry their courage forward." Renwick nodded silently, the words a shared oath, binding them to the memory of the fallen and the uncertain dawn ahead. As night descended, the sounds of distant mourning and the crackle of dying fires became the lullaby of the survivors. Each soldier, wrapped in tattered cloaks and soaked in mud, found a small corner of solace, knowing that Hades' shadow lingered. Yet they had met it head-on, not with despair, but with defiance. And in that defiance, a story began to take shape, a story that would be whispered through generations, not as a tale of mere conflict, but as a testament to the endurance, courage, and sacrifice of men who dared to challenge fate itself. The morning broke with muted light, a gray haze hanging over the battlefield, thick with smoke and the lingering scent of iron. Soldiers stirred from their temporary rest, bodies aching, faces streaked with grime and fatigue. The air carried the low hum of distant artillery and the occasional groan of the wounded, a somber symphony that seemed to linger in every breath. Private Callan flexed his fingers around the hilt of his sword, wincing as soreness shot up his arm. He glanced at the shattered landscape around him, Craters pockmarking the earth, broken wagons littered across the mud, and the skeletal remains of trees that had once stood as silent sentinels. He whispered under his breath. Hades himself would tremble to see this. Corporal Renwick moved beside him, adjusting the strap of his crossbow. Quiet, Callan. Keep your voice low, he said, eyes scanning the horizon. The enemy is regrouping. They smell weakness, and weakness gets swallowed alive. His tone carried the weight of experience, each word measured and heavy with caution. From a nearby hill, the sound of trumpets sliced through the morning air, signaling a new assault. Captain Leontius climbed to a vantage point, his armor dull with soot, but still catching the faint morning light. Positions, he commanded, voice cutting to the murmur of nerves and pain. Hold your ground, or this valley becomes our tomb. Soldiers scrambled into formation, their faces set in grim determination, each aware that today could decide the fate of the campaign. The enemy advanced, their lines disciplined but ragged from previous skirmishes. Their shields clanged in unison, a metallic cadence that echoed across the valley. Arrows darkened the sky, flying like harbingers of death, and the crackle of musket fire joined the chorus. Callan ducked behind a shattered wall, firing a volley and then reloading with trembling hands. Beside him, Renwick let loose his crossbow, each bolt finding its mark in the chaos. The first clash came like a thunderclap. Infantry collided with infantry, the ring of steel on steel deafening. Men shouted, curses and prayers mingling in a chaotic melody, while the wounded cried out in agony, their voices swallowed by the roar of battle. Leontius led a small detachment forward, cutting through enemy lines with precision, his sword a blur in the morning light. For the fallen, he roared, a single battle cry that spurred weary soldiers to rally. Callan found himself in a pocket of enemy combatants, swinging his sword in desperate arcs. He felt the sting of a glancing blow across his shoulder, but pressed on, adrenaline drowning the pain. One enemy soldier lunged at him, but Callan sidestepped and drove his blade home, a grim satisfaction mingling with the horror of taking life. Renwick was nearby, shouting encouragement, his eyes sharp, calculating each move in a dance of survival and aggression. Hours passed like minutes, each wave of combat more brutal than the last. Artillery fire hammered both sides, shaking the earth beneath their feet. Cavalry charges thundered across the fields, horses screaming, riders falling into mud and blood. The sun climbed higher, its heat oppressive, yet the soldiers pressed on, fueled by a mix of fear, duty, and the raw instinct to survive. By midday, the tide of battle began to shift. Leontius had spotted a weakness in the enemy's left flank and signaled a maneuver. Cavalry and infantry moved in synchrony, flanking the enemy and forcing them into a desperate retreat. Push them, Leontius shouted, his voice ragged but commanding. Do not let them recover. The soldiers surged forward, their combined efforts driving the enemy back, but at a staggering cost. Callan stumbled over a fallen comrade, his heart pounding. Move! Renwick barked, pulling him to his feet. They pressed on, cutting to the disarrayed ranks, each step a testament to endurance and courage. The battlefield was a mosaic of chaos, bravery, and death, the screams of men and the whinnying of terrified horses blending into a cacophony of war. As evening approached, the enemy finally broke, fleeing across the valley with what remained of their forces. Fires burned where artillery had struck, casting long shadows across the scarred landscape. Soldiers cheered, but the victory was bittersweet. The ground was littered with the fallen, both friend and foe, and the air was heavy with grief and exhaustion. Leontius gathered his men, his face smeared with dirt and blood. We have survived a day, he said, his voice steady but low, carrying the weight of countless losses. Remember those who cannot stand beside us. Honor them by carrying their courage forward. His words were met with solemn nods and quiet murmurs of agreement, the soldiers understanding the gravity of survival amidst such devastation. Callan found a moment of stillness, sitting on a broken wagon, staring at the horizon. The sky was painted with the reds and purples of twilight, a stark contrast to the horrors beneath it. We are still alive, he whispered to himself, feeling both relief and sorrow. Renwick joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. And we will carry on, he said, for those who fell and for those yet to fight. As darkness fell, The survivors tended to the wounded, the crackle of fires punctuating the silence. The valley, once a battlefield, became a somber tableau of resilience and sacrifice. Each soldier knew that war demanded not only strength, but the courage to face despair and the determination to endure. And in that endurance, they found a deeper understanding of their own humanity, the fragile yet unyielding flame that refused to be extinguished even amidst the shadow of Hades himself. The dawn brought an uneasy calm over the battlefield. Mist curled like ghostly fingers across the cratered fields, masking the true extent of the devastation from the previous day. Soldiers moved cautiously among the wreckage, tending to the wounded, collecting ammunition, and fortifying their positions. Every crack of distant musket fire or the creak of armor sounded like a harbinger of renewed chaos. Private Callan adjusted the strap of his bloodied pack, his muscles stiff from exhaustion. He surveyed the valley, now a graveyard of shattered earth and fallen men. "You think they'll come again?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Corporal Renwick, crouched beside a makeshift barricade, shook his head. "They have no choice. If they retreat now, their king will have their heads. And if they stay, we will tear them apart." There was no bravado in his tone, only the hardened certainty of someone who had seen too much death to be fooled by fear. Captain Leontius appeared over the ridge, sword still in hand, eyes scanning the horizon with unwavering focus. "Men," he called, his voice carrying across the valley. "Today we do not merely survive. Today we strike. We strike for the fallen, for our families, and for the legacy that will carry our names through history." A ripple of determination passed through the ranks, the tension in the air momentarily replaced by the fiery resolve of purpose. The enemy had retreated toward the northern ridge, but their numbers were quickly regrouping. Scouts reported that a large contingent of cavalry and archers was moving to encircle the valley. Leontius frowned, rubbing the bridge of his nose beneath his helm. "They intend to trap us," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Then, decisively, he added, "We will not be trapped. We will draw them into the kill zone." Orders were shouted. Messengers ran along the muddy paths, and soldiers scrambled into position. Trenches were reinforced, artillery recalibrated, and archers positioned along natural ridges for optimal coverage. Callan found himself gripping his musket tighter than ever, aware that the next wave would decide not only their survival, but perhaps the entire course of the campaign. As the morning sun climbed, the enemy appeared on the horizon like a dark tide. Their banners flapped violently in the wind, the emblem of their king an ominous signal of authority and impending violence. Trumpets blared across their lines, and a chorus of drums beat in perfect synchronization, a menacing rhythm that echoed through the valley. Callan swallowed hard, feeling a tight knot of fear and anticipation coil in his stomach. The first volley of arrows flew, before either side fully engaged. The sky darkened as the enemy unleashed a coordinated barrage. Callan and Renwick fired in disciplined volleys, each shot finding a target among the advancing enemy. The air was filled with the sharp whistle of arrows and the deafening cracks of muskets, a chaotic orchestra of death. Men fell around them, screaming, some clutching wounds that would never heal. Others moved forward, driven by adrenaline, fury, or sheer instinct. Amidst the chaos, Leontius led a small detachment on a flanking maneuver, slipping through broken terrain to strike the enemy's right wing. "For every life they've taken," he shouted, charging with ferocity that seemed to ignite the soldiers around him. The clash was violent and immediate. Steel rang against steel, hooves struck mud-choked earth, and cries of pain and triumph mingled in a terrifying symphony. Callan found himself face to face with an enemy soldier, the man's eyes wide with both fear and resolve. Their swords collided with metallic screech, sparks flying with each desperate parry. He felt the sweat on his brow, the pounding of his heart, the heat of exertion. Every second stretched into an eternity as they fought, until Callan's blade found its mark. He pulled back, chest heaving, staring at the fallen man, a mix of horror and grim satisfaction coursing through him. Hours passed in a relentless blur. Cavalry charges were met with disciplined volleys of musket fire. Artillery pieces barked out death, shaking the ground with each detonation. Soldiers screamed, collapsed, and rose again, their faces smeared with mud, blood, and unyielding resolve. Callan's hands were raw, muscles trembling. Yet he pressed on, driven by a strange mix of fear, duty, and the unspoken promise to survive. By late afternoon, the enemy began to falter. Leontius' strategic positioning had created chaos within their ranks. Cavalry units collided. Archers found themselves exposed, and the infantry struggled to maintain formation. Calls for retreat echoed through the valley, a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of their army. Yet the soldiers of Callan's side pressed forward, relentless, determined to turn the tide completely. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield, the enemy's forces broke entirely. Soldiers fled, leaving behind weapons, banners, and the bodies of their fallen. The valley, scarred and battered, was silent except for the ragged breathing of the survivors and the occasional moan of the wounded. Callan sank to his knees, hands gripping the muddy earth, eyes scanning the horizon as reality slowly settled in. Leontius approached, armor dented, face streaked with soot, eyes hardened but triumphant. "We have won today," he said quietly, not as a declaration, but as a sober acknowledgement of the cost. "But remember this, victory is never without sacrifice. Each life lost echoes through history, a reminder of what it takes to endure." Callan glanced at the horizon, watching the last remnant of the enemy disappear into the distance. He felt exhaustion, grief, and a strange, hollow pride. Renwick sat beside him, sharing the same silent reflection, the bond forged through battle stronger than words could ever convey. "We survived," Callan whispered. "But at what cost?" As darkness fell, fires were lit across the valley, casting flickering shadows that danced over the shattered earth. Soldiers moved among the wounded, some singing prayers, others quietly mourning comrades. The sound of distant owls and the rustle of night creatures replaced the roar of battle, yet the air remained heavy with memory and loss. Callan finally allowed himself a moment of stillness, staring at the stars emerging above the valley. Each one seemed distant, cold, indifferent to suffering below, yet somehow comforting in its permanence. "We fight, we endure, we remember," he whispered, voice barely audible. "That is our legacy. That is our defiance against the darkness." And in that moment, amidst the ruins of the battlefield and the lingering shadow of Hades, the soldiers understood something profound. War was not merely about victory or defeat. It was about courage in the face of inevitability, about sacrifice in pursuit of something larger than oneself, and about the fragile, unyielding light of humanity that refused to be extinguished, even in the depths of despair. The night brought a chilling wind that swept across the valley, carrying with it the stench of blood, smoke, and damp earth. Soldiers huddled around smoldering fires, their bodies stiff and aching, minds haunted by the screams and sights of the day's battle. Few words were spoken. Exhaustion weighed heavier than fear now. Yet the tension remained, a quiet reminder that the enemy had not vanished. They had merely retreated to lick their wounds and plan anew. Private Callan rubbed his temple, trying to ease the throbbing headache that had begun in the heat of the afternoon. "Do you think they'll strike again before dawn?" he asked, voice barely audible above the crackle of fire. Corporal Renwick shook his head, eyes scanning the horizon with instinctive vigilance. "If they do, it won't be the same battle. They've learned from their mistakes. We must be ready for anything." The words hung in the air like a grim prophecy. Captain Leontius moved among the men, inspecting weapons, checking on the wounded, and speaking quietly to those too weary to stand tall. His armor was dented and scorched, his face lined with soot and exhaustion, yet his eyes burned with the clarity of purpose. "Rest if you can," he said softly to Callan as he passed, "but stay alert. Victory is never final, and the shadow of Hades waits for the unprepared." The soldiers attempted what little sleep they could, leaning against broken wagons or lying on the cold, mud-soaked ground. Dreams were fleeting and haunted, filled with flashes of steel fire and the faces of comrades lost. When Callan closed his eyes, he saw the enemy's cavalry crashing down upon them, the air thick with arrows and the screams of men and horses alike. Each time he awoke, it was to the muted groans of the valley, the constant reminder that survival was temporary, fragile, and costly. Before the first light of dawn, scouts returned with grim news. The enemy was reorganizing, amassing a force far larger than expected, planning a coordinated assault that could overwhelm even their newly fortified positions. Leontius convened a council of officers, their voices low but urgent. Maps were spread across a blood-stained table, fingers tracing ridges, valleys, and choke points. Strategies were debated, adjusted, and reinforced. The plan was daring. A series of ambushes and counterattacks designed to funnel the enemy into kill zones where their numbers would count for nothing against prepared artillery and disciplined infantry. By mid-morning, the enemy emerged, their banners snapping violently in the wind, ranks tight and disciplined. Trumpets blared a signal. Drums beat a relentless rhythm, and the first volleys of arrows were released into the smoky air. Soldiers responded in kind, the valley erupting once more into chaos, a war machine fueled by adrenaline, fear, and duty. Callan's hands were steady now, muscles taut, senses heightened by the knowledge that survival required perfect timing, coordination, and unflinching resolve. The clash was immediate and brutal. Cavalry charged with thundering hooves, swords gleaming, their momentum slicing through the front lines. Infantry met them with disciplined volleys, forcing riders to falter or fall. Artillery pieces barked, sending iron balls screaming to the enemy ranks, creating panic and disorder. Callan fought in the midst of it, each swing of his sword a calculation of survival and precision. He heard the cries of friends and foes alike, the cacophony of war weaving into a surreal symphony of death and defiance. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, turning smoke and dust into a swirling haze of heat and grit. Leontius led a decisive flanking maneuver, striking the enemy's exposed rear lines. The attack sowed confusion, and the enemy began to falter, their disciplined formation breaking under the relentless pressure. Soldiers cheered, shouted, and pressed forward, yet every step carried the weight of loss, the memory of those who had fallen hours before. Amidst the carnage, Callan found himself separated from Renwick, pinned against a ridge by enemy spearmen. The clash was immediate. He parried, dodged, and struck with a focus born of desperation. One by one, the soldiers before him fell, until he stood alone, chest heaving, eyes locked on the remaining enemy officer directing the assault. Without hesitation, Callan charged, using the terrain to his advantage. He collided with the officer, steel ringing against steel in a violent echo that carried across the battlefield. The officer fell, and Callan pressed forward, rallying nearby soldiers to push through the disarrayed lines. By afternoon, the enemy's forces were in full retreat. The valley, scarred and battered, was filled with the groans of the wounded, the cries of the dying, and the sighs of those who had survived yet again. Leontius walked among his men, surveying the aftermath, the weight of command heavy upon him. "Today, we have struck back against despair itself," he said, voice carrying over the field. "But remember, war is never done. Every victory is built upon sacrifice, and every loss is etched into the memory of those who endure." Callan sank to his knees on the muddy ground, staring at the remnants of the battlefield. Smoke curled from shattered wagons and broken siege engines, the air filled with the acrid scent of burned wood and gunpowder. Around him, soldiers tended to wounds, carried the dead, and offered quiet prayers for those who would not rise again. Renwick finally rejoined him, bloodied but unbroken. "We're still here," he said quietly, voice carrying both relief and sorrow. "That counts for something." As evening fell, the valley became a strange, haunting tableau of survival and memory. Fires burned among the ruins, casting flickering shadows over the landscape. Callan gazed at the horizon, the last light of day painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. "Hades watches over this place," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "And yet we endure." Leontius approached, placing a heavy hand on Callan's shoulder. "Endurance is the measure of men," he said quietly. "Not the absence of fear or death, but the courage to face them again and again. Remember this, Callan. History is written by those who refuse to surrender to the darkness." That night, as the soldiers slept fitfully, the weight of what had been endured settled over them. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. And yet, amidst the sorrow, exhaustion, and lingering shadows of death, a fragile ember of hope burned, a testament to courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of men who dared to confront not only the enemy, but the shadow of Hades itself. The dawn broke with an unnatural stillness over the valley, a muted gray light illuminating the scarred earth. Soldiers stirred slowly, bodies aching from the relentless fighting. faces streaked with soot, sweat, and tears. The battlefield, littered with broken weapons, shattered carts, and the fallen, seemed to breathe a ghostly sigh with each gust of wind. Even the birds, once curious witnesses to human endeavor, remained silent, as if wary of the shadows that lingered. Private Callan rose from a cold patch of mud, rubbing his raw hands against the rough fabric of his uniform. His eyes scanned the horizon, restless and uneasy. "They're out there," he murmured to himself. Corporal Renwick, crouched nearby cleaning his musket, glanced up with a hardened expression. "Yes," he replied quietly. "And they've learned. They'll strike hard today. We need to be ready for every trick they have." His tone was steady, but the undercurrent of tension betrayed the truth. The coming battle could decide everything. Captain Leontius appeared over the ridge, sword strapped to his side, face lined with exhaustion and determination. "Men," he called, his voice slicing through the uneasy calm. "Today we do not merely fight to survive. Today, we fight to ensure that our sacrifice carries meaning. Stand firm, and remember what we are defending: our homes, our families, and the memory of those who cannot be here with us." His words ignited sparks of courage in the hearts of weary soldiers, a fragile flame flickering in the shadow of impending violence. Scouts returned with urgent reports. The enemy had consolidated their forces, and their commanders had devised a coordinated strike aimed at breaking the valley's defenses. Leontius studied the maps and terrain, tracing finger along ridges and narrow passes. "We will not meet them head-on," he said, voice low and deliberate. "We will draw them into the choke points, where numbers count for nothing, and then we will strike with everything we have." Officers nodded in agreement, each aware that success required both precision and unflinching resolve. The first clash came as a muted tremor of movement on the horizon. Enemy cavalry emerged from the mist, banners snapping violently in the wind, while infantry formed tight, disciplined ranks behind them. The faint thrum of drums and the sharp blare of trumpets heralded the storm, echoing across the valley like the heartbeat of war itself. Callan gripped his musket tighter, knuckles white, as the adrenaline of anticipation coursed through his veins. Arrows darkened the sky, the hiss of their flight a harbinger of death. Soldiers raised shields, took cover, and returned fire, each volley a desperate attempt to halt the relentless advance. Musket fire cracked in rhythm with the pounding of hooves, a chaotic symphony of violence and survival. Callan moved to the fray with practiced precision, his eyes darting from threat to threat, his every instinct honed by countless hours of combat. The enemy's first wave was met with devastating resistance. Trenches, barricades, and strategically positioned artillery tore through advancing soldiers, sending riders and infantry alike into disarray. Yet the assault was relentless. The enemy adapted, exploiting every gap, testing the limits of endurance and discipline. Leontius moved along the line, shouting commands, offering encouragement, and personally leading counterattacks where the line faltered. His presence was both a shield and a rallying cry, instilling courage in men pushed to their breaking point. Hours passed in a blur of motion and chaos. Cavalry charges collided with musket volleys. Artillery fired relentlessly, and soldiers screamed in exertion, pain, and fury. Callan found himself pressed into a narrow pass, facing a group of enemy soldiers with nowhere to retreat. Steel clanged against steel, boots slipped in mud, and the cries of the fallen echoed ominously. With a deep breath, he fought forward, each movement a calculated strike, each swing of his sword a testament to survival and determination. The turning point came when Leontius executed a daring flanking maneuver. Cavalry units struck from the high ground, sweeping down upon the enemy's exposed flank. Chaos erupted in the ranks, orders lost in the din, and soldiers stumbled, tripped, and fell into the mud and blood-soaked earth. Callan and Renwick seized a moment, rallying nearby troops to press forward and exploit the confusion. The battlefield became a maelstrom of fury, strategy, and desperation, each action carrying the weight of life or death. By late afternoon, the enemy lines began to crumble. Soldiers fled in disarray, banners trampled underfoot, and artillery abandoned as their commanders struggled to regain control. The valley, once a theater of organized violence, became a chaotic landscape of pursuit and collapse. Callan, lungs burning, eyes stinging with sweat and smoke, pressed forward relentlessly, every movement driven by instinct, fear, and an unwavering will to survive. As dusk approached, the final pockets of resistance were extinguished. Fires burned among shattered carts and wrecked siege engines, sending smoke curling into the evening sky. Survivors moved among the injured, tending to wounds, offering quiet words of comfort, and whispering prayers for the dead. Leontius stood atop a ridge, surveying the valley, face lined with exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. "We have endured," he said softly, voice carrying to those nearest. "But endurance is never without cost. Remember those who gave all, and honor them by carrying their courage forward." Callan sank to his knees on the scarred ground, staring at the remnants of the battlefield. The air was heavy with smoke, mud, and the lingering scent of blood. He thought of friends lost, the young and the brave who would never see home again. Renwick crouched beside him, silent but resolute, their shared experiences binding them in ways words could never convey. "We live," Callan whispered, voice thick with emotion. "That alone is proof enough." Night fell, and the valley transformed into a haunting tableau of endurance, memory, and reflection. Fires flickered over broken terrain, casting long, dancing shadows that mingled with the spirits of the fallen. Soldiers, exhausted and somber, finally allowed themselves to rest, if only for a few fleeting hours. Callan gazed at the stars, distant and indifferent yet eternal, drawing a strange comfort from their permanence. Hades' shadow lingered over the valley, a reminder of mortality and the relentless nature of war. And yet, amidst the desolation and sorrow, a fragile ember of hope burned. Courage, sacrifice, and human resilience had carried them through another trial, and though the road ahead remained uncertain, the soldiers of this campaign had learned a vital truth, that the strength of men is measured not by the battles they win, but by the courage they summon in the face of inevitable darkness. The next morning arrived shrouded in a tense, muted light, the valley bathed in a pale gray mist that clung to ground like a living entity. Soldiers moved cautiously, muscles stiff and minds weary after the relentless fighting of the previous days. The battlefield, scarred and broken, seemed to breathe a low, mournful sigh, whispering reminders of the lives lost and the sacrifices yet to come. Private Callan flexed his fingers around the hilt of his sword, the leather grip slick with sweat and blood. He glanced toward the distant ridge where the enemy had regrouped. "They won't wait long," he said, voice low and taut. Corporal Renwick, crouched behind a shattered cart while inspecting his musket, nodded grimly. "No," he replied, "and when they strike, it will be with everything they've got. We need to hold, or this valley becomes our tomb." Captain Leontius appeared atop a nearby hill, his silhouette stark against the dim light, armor dented and streaked with soot. He surveyed the troops with eyes that seemed to pierce through both fear and fatigue. "Men," he called, voice firm and commanding. "The enemy believes that we are weary, broken, and defeated. They are wrong. Today, we fight not only for survival, but for the honor of every fallen brother who cannot stand beside us. Remember their courage, and let it guide your hand." The soldiers responded with a chorus of shouts, a mixture of defiance, exhaustion, and raw determination. Even the shadows of dread, hope flickered, a fragile ember that refused to be extinguished. Leontius moved along the ranks, adjusting formations, inspecting weapons, and offering quiet words of encouragement. Every gesture precise, every word deliberate, reinforcing the fragile cohesion that might turn the tide once more. Scouts returned with news that made the blood run cold. The enemy had doubled their forces overnight, amassing reinforcements that threatened to overwhelm even the most prepared defensive positions. Leontius examined maps and terrain, tracing possible approaches and exits with a callous finger. "We cannot meet them head-on," he muttered, more to himself than to the officers gathered around. "We will use the valley itself, the ridges, and the narrow passes to turn their strength into weakness. Let them stumble into the trap we have prepared." By late morning, the enemy emerged, a dark tide rolling over the horizon. Trumpets blared and drums beat a relentless rhythm, a grim heartbeat that echoed across the valley. Cavalry and infantry advanced with precise coordination, their banners snapping violently in the wind. The soldiers on Leontius' side held their positions, muscles tense, hearts racing, eyes fixed on the approaching storm. Arrows darkened the sky, a deadly rain that hissed and struck with cruel precision. Muskets cracked in disciplined volleys, artillery roared, and the valley erupted in chaos as both sides collided in a violent symphony of war. Callan found himself in the midst of a narrow pass, pressed against the enemy by their sheer numbers. Every swing of his sword, every careful step, was a battle between survival and exhaustion, fear and courage. Hours passed in an unrelenting blur of violence. Cavalry charges collided with infantry lines. Artillery shells shattered both earth and morale, and soldiers screamed, fell, and rose again with tireless determination. Callan fought beside Renwick, their movements synchronized through experience and trust, each strike and parry a testament to the bond forged in fire and blood. "Hold the line," Leontius shouted, his voice carrying over the cacophony. "Do not let them break us." The turning point arrived when Leontius executed a daring maneuver. A contingent of his best-trained soldiers, hidden in the folds of the valley, emerged to strike the enemy's exposed flank. Chaos erupted in their ranks. Cavalry collided with infantry. Orders became impossible to enforce, and fear spread faster than reason. Callan seized the opportunity, rallying nearby troops to push forward, each movement a calculated gamble against death. By late afternoon, the enemy began to falter. Their formation shattered. Retreat became inevitable. Soldiers ran, banners trampled, cannons abandoned, and the once coordinated assault devolved into disarray and panic. Callan's muscles screamed, lungs burned, and sweat mingled with blood, yet he pressed on relentlessly. Every step was a defiance against inevitability, a small rebellion against the shadow that loomed over the valley. As evening descended, the battlefield transformed into a grim tableau of survival and memory. Fires burned among shattered wagons and broken siege engines, casting flickering shadows across the terrain. Survivors tended to the wounded, mourned the dead, and whispered prayers for those who would never rise again. Leontius walked among them, surveying the aftermath with eyes that carried both grief and quiet pride. "Victory is ours," he said softly, voice low but clear. "But remember, every victory carries a cost. Every life lost echoes to the memory of those who endure." Callan sank to his knees on the mud-slick ground, staring at the horizon where the enemy's last soldiers vanished into the distance. Renwick crouched beside him, sharing the same silent reflection. "We've survived," Callan whispered, voice trembling. "But at what cost?" The air was heavy with smoke and sorrow, the valley a testament to the toll exacted by relentless battle. Night fell, and the valley became a quiet, haunting place. The cries of the wounded softened to groans, and the flickering fires cast long, dancing shadows across the broken earth. Callan gazed the stars above, their cold light distant yet eternal. "Hades watches over this place," he murmured, "and yet we endure." Renwick placed a steady hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgment of shared endurance, courage, and the fragile ember of hope that still burned. Captain Leontius observed the valley from a ridge, his eyes taking the scale of the devastation, the resilience of his soldiers, and the shadow that lingered over every victory. "Endurance," he whispered to himself, "is the measure of men, not in the absence of fear, but in the courage to face it again and again. History is written by those who refuse to surrender to the darkness." In that stillness, amid smoke, mud, and the whispers of the fallen, the soldiers understood something vital. War was not simply measured in victories or defeats. It was measured in courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit that refused to bow even when surrounded by despair. The shadow of Hades lingered, but it had been met with defiance, with humanity, and with the unyielding resolve of men who dared confront it head-on. The morning air was thick with smoke and the scent of scorched earth, a bitter reminder of the days of relentless fighting that had scarred the valley. Soldiers moved cautiously, muscles stiff and minds tense, aware that the enemy had not yet given up. Every creaking branch, every distant cry, every shifting shadow seemed amplified, a reminder that Hades' shadow was never far from the living. Private Callan adjusted the strap of his bloodied pack, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressed down upon him. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of the enemy. "Do you think they'll strike from the ridge again?" he asked, voice hoarse and laced with fatigue. Corporal Renwick, crouched behind a crumbled wall, shook his head. "No," he replied quietly. "They've learned that frontal assaults are wasted against us now. They'll try something unexpected, something desperate. Stay sharp." Captain Leontius moved along the lines, his boots sinking into mud and debris, armor dented and streaked with soot, face lined with exhaustion. He surveyed the soldiers with a calculated intensity. "Men," he called, voice cutting to the tension. "Today we fight not just to survive, but to end this nightmare. Our enemies are cunning, yes, but our resolve is stronger. Hold your ground. Follow orders and remember why we fight." The word stirred something deep within the ranks, a flicker of defiance against despair, a fragile ember of hope that refused to be extinguished. Scouts returned with urgent intelligence. The enemy had organized a surprise attack, planning to descend from multiple high points simultaneously. Leontius studied the maps with grim focus, tracing the terrain with his callous finger. "We will not be caught unprepared," he said, voice low but firm. "Our artillery, our infantry, our cavalry, they will meet them at every approach. Let them come. Let them face the valley itself." By mid-morning, the enemy appeared, a dark, writhing mass moving with both precision and desperation. Trumpets blared, drums beat a relentless rhythm, and the first arrows whistled through the air, striking with lethal intent. Soldiers took positions behind barricades, trenches, and natural ridges, weapons poised for the storm to come. Callan's hands trembled slightly, but his resolve was steel-hardened. "We've faced worse," he muttered to Renwick, "and we've survived." The battle erupted with a sudden, terrifying intensity. Cavalry charged from the ridges, striking with terrifying force, while infantry pressed forward in tightly coordinated lines. Arrows darkened the sky, musket fire cracked in disciplined volleys, and the valley became a cacophony of violence, smoke, and chaos. Callan fought in the midst of it, parrying, striking, and moving with the precision of a man who had survived countless encounters with death. Hours passed in relentless succession. Cavalry collided with infantry, artillery pieces barked, hurling iron through enemy lines, and soldiers screamed in exertion, fear, and fury. Callan moved beside Renwick, their coordination flawless, a dance of survival honed through shared trials. "Push forward," Leontius shouted, leading a counterattack that cut through the enemy's exposed flank. Chaos erupted in their ranks as soldiers fled, orders lost amidst the thunder of hooves, the clash of steel and the roar of artillery. Midday brought a momentary lull, a grim pause where the battlefield seemed to breathe. Survivors scanned the horizon, muscles trembling, lungs burning, hearts pounding. The valley was a graveyard of bodies, broken wagons, and spent artillery, yet the enemy remained persistent, regrouping for another desperate assault. Callan pressed a rag to his bleeding arm, staring at the distant ridges. "How many more?" he whispered, voice raw with exhaustion. Renwick's eyes were dark with determination. "As many as it takes," he replied. "We cannot falter now." Leontius devised a bold maneuver. Using hidden passes and trenches, he organized a pincer movement designed to crush the enemy's remaining forces. Soldiers moved with urgent precision, artillery repositioned to maximize impact, and archers took their places along ridges to rain death upon the approaching lines. Callan's heart raced as he prepared for what might be the final wave of combat, the culmination of days of blood, sweat, and relentless struggle. The enemy struck again, this time with fury born of desperation. Cavalry descended from hidden slopes, infantry surged forward, and the valley erupted into a maelstrom of violence. Callan saw a clash with an enemy officer, steel ringing sharply through the haze of smoke and dust. Around him, men fell, rose, and fought again, a testament to endurance in the face of unimaginable adversity. Renwick fought beside him, every movement precise, every strike a reflection of training, instinct, and shared trust. As afternoon faded into evening, the enemy's cohesion began to break. Leontius's pincer maneuver proved decisive, cutting off escape routes and isolating units. Panic spread to the remaining enemy ranks as soldiers were forced into a deadly funnel where artillery, musket fire, and disciplined infantry decimated them. Callan pressed forward, rallying scattered troops to press the advantage, each step a defiance against the shadow that sought to consume the valley. By sunset, the battle had reached its climax. Fires burned across the valley, smoke curling into the sky, casting flickering shadows over the scarred earth. The enemy, broken and demoralized, fled into the night, leaving behind weapons, banners, and the memories of those who would never return. Callan sank to his knees, body trembling, lungs heaving, eyes scanning the horizon where victory had been hard-won yet dearly paid for. Leontius walked among the survivors, face streaked with soot and exhaustion, eyes carrying both pride and sorrow. "We have endured," he said quietly, voice carrying to those nearest. "But endurance comes at a cost. Remember the fallen, honor their courage, and carry their memory forward. The valley remembers them, and so must we." Night descended over the valley, a quiet and haunting stillness replacing the cacophony of battle. Fires flickered over the shattered terrain, casting long, dancing shadows. Soldiers tended to the wounded, mourned the dead, and whispered prayers for those who would never rise again. Callan gazed at the stars, distant and indifferent, yet eternal, a reminder that, though Hades' shadow lingered, the resilience and courage of men endured. In that stillness, a fragile truth emerged. War was measured not in victories or defeats alone, but in courage, sacrifice, and the unyielding determination to face the darkness without surrender. The shadow of Hades had been met, challenged, and for now, held at bay. And in that defiance, humanity had claimed its most enduring victory. The will to endure, to remember, and to rise again despite the horrors of the valley. Dawn broke over the valley with a cold, gray light, seeping into the trenches, wreckage, and scorched earth like a hesitant reminder that the world continued despite the horrors of battle. Soldiers stirred from uneasy rest, muscles stiff, bodies aching from days of relentless fighting. The valley was silent now, but not peaceful. The air was thick with anticipation, for both sides knew the war was far from over. Private Callan rose slowly, his hands trembling as he adjusted the strap of his pack. Each movement sent waves of soreness through his body, but he moved with the grim determination of a man who had survived impossible odds. He glanced at the horizon, where the faint shimmer of enemy banners hinted at regrouping forces. "They're still out there," he whispered to Corporal Renwick, who was carefully inspecting his musket. Renwick nodded grimly. "Yes, and they will strike again. But we have survived worse. Stay sharp, Callan." Captain Leontius appeared over the ridge, armor dented, face streaked with soot and blood, eyes scanning the valley with calculated intensity. "Men," he called, voice firm and commanding, "we have faced despair and emerged alive, but do not mistake survival for victory. Today, we press our advantage. We move not only to defend ourselves, but to ensure that the shadow that haunts this valley is broken for good." A cheer rose, cautious or determined, carrying across the mud-choked trenches. Soldiers prepared their weapons, tightened armor straps, and steeled themselves for the final assaults that would decide the valley's fate. Scouts returned with intelligence. Enemy forces had split into multiple detachments, planning a coordinated strike aimed at encircling Leontius's men. The plan was desperate but cunning. Leontius studied the maps, tracing ridges, gullies, and choke points with a callous finger. "We will not be trapped," he murmured. "We will turn their desperation against them. Every pass, every ridge, every river will become a weapon in our hands." By late morning, the enemy emerged from the mist, a dark, writhing mass advancing with grim precision. Trumpets blared, drums pounded a relentless rhythm, and the first volley of arrows arched through the air, a deadly hailstorm aimed at testing the valley's defenses. Soldiers readied shields, leveled muskets, and steadied their nerves. Callan's pulse thrummed like a drum in his ears, each heartbeat a reminder that survival required focus, speed, and courage. The first clash was violent and immediate. Cavalry charged from elevated positions, hove striking mud and rock with terrifying force, while infantry surged forward in coordinated lines. Muskets cracked, artillery roared, and the valley became a living nightmare, a cacophony of smoke, steel, and human endurance. Callan fought amid the chaos, striking, parrying, moving with a rhythm honed from countless battles. Each swing of his sword carried the weight of survival and the memory of those who had fallen beside him. Hours passed in relentless succession. Cavalry collided with infantry. Artillery shredded advancing formations, and soldiers screamed in fear, exertion, and fury. Callan pressed forward beside Renwick, their coordination flawless, a dance of survival and trust forged in fire and blood. Around them, comrades fell, rose, and fought again, each motion a testament to resilience and courage in the face of Hades' shadow. By midday, Leontius executed a daring maneuver, sending a contingent of his best-trained soldiers through hidden passes to strike the enemy's flank. Chaos erupted in the opposing ranks. Cavalry collided with infantry. Orders were lost amidst the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel, and soldiers were forced into narrow corridors where artillery and musket fire cut them down mercilessly. Callan seized a moment, rallying scattered troops to press forward and exploit the confusion. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, the enemy began to falter. Their coordination collapsed under relentless pressure, and retreat became inevitable. Soldiers fled, leaving behind weapons, banners, and bodies. Callan's muscles burned, lungs heaving, yet he pressed on, determined to secure victory and honor the fallen. Around him, the battlefield was a testament to both human resilience and the staggering cost of war. Evening approached, casting the valley in long shadows. Fires burned across the broken terrain, smoke curling into the sky like ghostly tendrils. Survivors moved among the wounded, tended the dead, and whispered prayers for those who would never rise again. Leontius walked among the troops, observing the aftermath with both pride and sorrow. "Victory has a price," he said softly, voice carrying to those nearby. "Remember the fallen, honor their courage, and let their sacrifice guide every step forward." Callan sank to his knees on the mud-slick ground, staring at the horizon where the enemy had vanished. Renwick crouched beside him, silent but resolute, sharing the weight of survival. "We live," Callan whispered, voice thick with exhaustion and emotion. "And that counts for something." Night fell, bringing an eerie, reflective quiet. Fires flickered across the battlefield, casting dancing shadows over shattered wagons and broken artillery. Soldiers tended to wounds, mourned their dead, and whispered prayers to whatever gods would listen. Callan looked to the sky, stars distant yet eternal, a reminder that even amidst death and despair, the world continued. Hades' shadow lingered, a reminder of mortality and the relentless nature of war. Yet amidst the sorrow and destruction, a fragile ember of hope burned. Courage, endurance, and sacrifice had carried them through unimaginable trials. The valley had become both a graveyard and a testament to human resolve. In that enduring defiance, the soldiers found a truth as ancient as the earth itself, that the measure of men is not in the battles they fight, but in the courage with which they face inevitable darkness and the strength to rise again. The valley awoke under a brittle dawn, pale light cutting through the lingering smoke and mist of previous battles. Soldiers moved with quiet deliberation, muscles stiff in the relentless strain of the campaign, eyes heavy with fatigue, yet alert for the shadow of the enemy that still haunted the ridges. Every footstep on the churned mud seemed to echo, a reminder that even in silence, war never truly sleeps. Private Callan flexed his fingers around the hilt of his sword, each movement sending jolts of exhaustion through his body. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice low, turning to Corporal Renwick. "The valiant's waiting. Something's coming." Renwick's eyes scanned the distant ridges with practiced vigilance. "Yes," he replied, tone steady. "It's not over. The enemy is desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. Stay sharp." Captain Leontius appeared atop a small rise, surveying the valley with eyes sharpened by days of relentless conflict. His armor was dented, streaked with mud and soot, but his posture remained unyielding. "Men," he called, voice carrying across the tense silence. "Today we strike not only for ourselves, but for every soul who's fallen. Every life lost cries out for justice. We will not falter. We will not retreat. And we will endure, even when the valley itself seems to mourn." Orders were passed quickly, formations adjusted, and artillery repositioned to maximize impact. Scouts returned with urgent news. The enemy had split their remaining forces into multiple columns, intending to converge on a valley simultaneously. Leontius studied the maps with a keen eye, tracing potential ambushes and choke points. "We will turn their desperation into their undoing," he said, voice low but resolute. "Every ridge, every pass, every obstacle will work in our favor. Let them charge into the trap we have prepared." By late morning, the enemy appeared, a dark, shifting mass advancing with grim determination. Trumpets blared, drums pounded a relentless rhythm, and the first volleys of arrows arched through the air, signaling the storm to come. Callan braced himself behind a mud-slick barricade, fingers tightening around the grip of his sword. "Hold your ground," he muttered, voice barely audible. "We've survived worse." The initial clash was immediate and brutal. Cavalry descended from elevated ridges, hooves striking mud and stone, their momentum tearing into the valley's defenses. Infantry surged forward in disciplined lines, muskets cracking and artillery roaring in violent reply. The valley erupted into chaos, a living symphony of smoke, steel, and human endurance. Callan fought amid the storm, parrying, striking, and moving with precision a man who had danced with death countless times. Hours passed in a relentless blur. Cavalry collided with infantry, artillery shredded advancing ranks, and soldiers screamed, fell, and rose again with undiminished determination. Callan pressed forward beside Renwick, their coordination flawless, a dance of survival honed through shared struggle. Around them, comrades fell and rose again, each act a testament to endurance, courage, and the grim reality of war. By midday, Leontius executed a bold flanking maneuver. A hidden detachment of soldiers swept around the enemy's exposed flank, creating confusion and chaos in their ranks. Cavalry collided with infantry. Orders were lost amidst the roar of battle, and soldiers stumbled into traps laid with deadly precision. Callan seized a moment, rallying nearby men to push the advantage. Each stepped forward a defiance against inevitability and despair. The battle raged into the afternoon, every moment a test of skill, courage, and sheer willpower. Callan found himself face to face with an enemy officer. Steel ringing against steel, each strike a violent conversation between life and death. Around him, the valley became a maelstrom of motion, screams, and fire, a theater of relentless brutality where every decision meant survival or demise. Renwick fought beside him, covering his flank, their shared trust a fragile lifeline amidst the chaos. As evening approached, the enemy's formation began to crumble. Confusion spread, panic surged, and retreat became unavoidable. Soldiers fled, banners were abandoned, and artillery pieces fell silent, leaving the valley scarred and still. Callan, muscles burning, lungs heaving, pressed on, ensuring that the remnants of the enemy could not regroup. Around him, the valley was a grim testament to the cost of human conflict. The dead, the wounded, the broken equipment, and the land itself scarred and unrecognizable. Leontius walked among the survivors, face streaked with soot and exhaustion, eyes reflecting both sorrow and quiet pride. "Victory has been won," he said softly, voice carrying to those nearest. "But remember, the cost has been great. Every life lost echoes in the memory of those who endure. Honor them by carrying their courage forward, by remembering the sacrifices that brought us to this moment." Callan sank to his knees on the mud-slick ground, staring at the horizon where the enemy had disappeared. Renwick crouched beside him, silent, sharing the weight of survival. "We live," Callan whispered, voice thick with emotion, "and that is proof enough." The valley seemed to sigh with him, the wind rustling through shattered trees and broken wagons, as if mourning the dead while acknowledging the living. Night fell, bringing a reflective, uneasy quiet. Fires flickered across the battlefield, casting long, dancing shadows over the wreckage. Soldiers tended to the wounded, mourned the dead, and whispered prayers for those who would never rise again. Callan gazed at the stars above, distant yet eternal, a reminder that even amidst death and despair, life endured. The shadow of Hades lingered, a haunting presence over the valley, a reminder of mortality and inexorable cost of war. Yet within that shadow, hope endured, a fragile, flickering ember fueled by courage, endurance, and sacrifice. In the endurance of men, the shadow was met with defiance, a testament that even in the face of relentless darkness, humanities would survive, to fight, and to remember remained unbroken. The morning air was heavy with the scent of smoke, blood, and damp earth, thick reminders of the relentless battles that had carved scars into the valley. Soldiers moved cautiously among the remnants of the battlefield, bodies sore, minds weary, hearts weighed down by the memory of the fallen. Every crack of timber, every distant groan, seemed amplified, echoing the toll that war had exacted. Private Callan rose from a cold, mud-streaked patch of earth, rubbing his aching shoulders and flexing stiff fingers. He scanned the horizon, where the last remnants of the enemy lingered like shadows on the ridge. "They're regrouping," he murmured to Corporal Renwick, eyes narrowing. Renwick adjusted his musket, muscles taut with anticipation. "Yes," he said quietly. "They'll try again. But we've learned, Callan. Today, we fight smarter. Today, we finish this." Captain Leontius appeared atop a ridge, armor dented and blackened by smoke, face etched with exhaustion, but eyes burning with resolve. "Men," he called, voice firm and unwavering. "We have endured what few could imagine, faced despair, and emerged alive. But the valley is not yet won. Today, we strike with purpose. Today, we end this nightmare." Soldiers around him stiffened, muscles tensing, hearts pounding with renewed determination. The flicker of hope sparked within them, fragile yet powerful, ready to be forged into the fire of action. Orders were relayed swiftly. Artillery was repositioned. Archers lined the ridges, and infantry prepared to meet the final assault. Scouts returned with intelligence confirming that the enemy had split their remaining forces, hoping to encircle Leontius's men in desperation. Leontius examined the maps carefully, tracing ridges, valleys, and hidden passes. "We will turn their desperation into their undoing," he murmured. "Every ridge, every river, every trap will work in our favor. Let them charge into our storm." By late morning, the enemy emerged, a mass of determination and desperation. Trumpets blared and drums pounded a relentless rhythm, signaling the coming clash. Arrows darkened the sky, and soldiers braced behind barricades, trenches, and natural ridges. Callan's hands gripped his sword tightly. "We've faced worse," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "We survive because we must." The first clash was immediate and violent. Cavalry thundered from elevated positions, hoofs striking mud and stone with terrifying force, while infantry surged forward in tight formations. Muskets cracked in disciplined volleys. Artillery roared, and the valley erupted into chaos. Callan moved through it, parrying strikes, countering attacks, and fighting with precision born of exhaustion and experience. Each motion was a blend of instinct, skill, and raw determination. Hours passed in unbroken succession. Cavalry collided with infantry, artillery shredded advancing ranks, and soldiers screamed in fear, pain, and fury. Callan fought beside Renwick, moving as one unit, a dance of survival and trust honed in the relentless heat of battle. Around them, comrades fell and rose again, the valley itself a living testament to endurance, courage, and the staggering cost of war. By midday, Leontius executed a bold flanking maneuver. A hidden contingent emerged from concealed positions, striking the enemy's exposed flank with devastating force. Chaos spread like wildfire through their ranks. Cavalry collided with infantry, orders were lost, and soldiers stumbled into deadly traps laid with precision. Callan rallied nearby men to press the advantage. Each stepped forward defiance against despair and inevitability. The battle raged through the afternoon, each moment a brutal test of skill, courage, and resilience. Callan faced an enemy officer head-on, steel ringing sharply with each clash. Around him, the valley became a whirlwind of movement, smoke, and fire, where each decision carried the weight of life or death. Renwick covered his flank, their bond unspoken but absolute, a fragile lifeline amidst chaos. As evening approached, the enemy's formation began to fracture. Confusion spread, panic surged, and retreat became unavoidable. Soldiers fled, banners were trampled, and artillery lay abandoned. Callan's muscles burned, lungs heaving. Yet he pressed forward, ensuring the enemy could not regroup. The valley bore the scars of the struggle, the dead, the wounded, the twisted remnants of what had once been military precision and strategy. Leontius walked among the surviving soldiers, face streaked with soot and exhaustion, eyes reflecting both grief and quiet pride. "Victory has been earned," he said softly, voice carrying over the field. "But remember the cost. Every life lost echoes in the memory of those who endure. Honor them by carrying their courage forward, by remembering the sacrifices that brought us here." Callan sank to his knees on the mud-slick ground, staring at the horizon where the enemy had vanished. Renwick crouched beside him, silent, sharing the weight of survival. "We live," Callan whispered, voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. "And that alone is proof enough." The valley seemed to respond, wind rustling through broken trees and charred wagons, mourning the dead while acknowledging the living. Night fell, bringing a quiet, reflective stillness. Fires flickered over shattered terrain, casting long shadows across wreckage and fallen soldiers. Survivors tended the wounded, mourned their dead, and whispered prayers to gods they hoped were listening. Callan gazed at the stars, distant, cold, eternal, a reminder that life persisted beyond the carnage. Hades' shadow lingered, a constant reminder of mortality and the relentless cost of war. Yet within that shadow, hope burned, a fragile ember forged from courage, sacrifice, and endurance. The valley had become both a graveyard and a testament to human resolve. In that defiance, soldiers understood a truth as old as the earth. The measure of men is not in victories alone, but in the courage to face darkness, endure suffering, and rise again. The dawn broke over the valley with an eerie calm, a pale, muted light filtering through a heavy mist. The battlefield, scarred and blackened, lay silent for the first time in days. Soldiers stirred, bodies stiff with exhaustion, minds heavy with grief, and hearts burdened by the memory of the relentless fighting that had carved both the land and their souls. Every step among the wreckage felt fragile, as though the earth itself might collapse beneath the weight of death and despair. Private Callan rose slowly, muscles screaming with every movement, eyes scanning the distant ridges where the remnants of the enemy might still linger. He turned to Corporal Renwick, who was checking the alignment of the remaining defensive lines. "Do you think they'll come back?" Callan whispered, voice rough with fatigue. Renwick shook his head, though the tension in his posture betrayed his caution. "No," he said, "they've suffered too much. Today we consolidate. Today we honor the fallen by surviving ourselves." Captain Leontius appeared atop a rise, armor battered and streaked with soot, face lined with exhaustion, but eyes blazing with quiet determination. "Men," he called, voice firm yet measured, "we have faced darkness and survived. The enemy is broken, but our work is not finished. We will fortify, tend to the wounded, and prepare for the future. Every life lost here must be remembered, every sacrifice honored. The shadow of Hades may linger, but we will endure." Soldiers moved through the valley with purposeful caution, clearing debris, tending fires, and helping the wounded. Artillery was inspected and repaired where possible, muskets cleaned, and supplies redistributed. The once chaotic battlefield was slowly transformed into a tableau of order, a fragile reprieve from the storm that had raged for so long. Callan helped carry a wounded comrade to a makeshift tent, each movement a testament to human endurance and compassion amidst ruin. As midday approached, scouts returned with intelligence confirming that the enemy had fled entirely, their forces shattered and morale broken. Leontius gathered his officers, tracing routes and discussing the next strategic steps. "We cannot let this valley remain a graveyard of memories," he said, voice low but resolute. "We will honor the fallen by securing it, fortifying it, and ensuring that what was endured here shapes the future, not just the past." The soldiers took a moment to breathe, to stand quietly among the remnants of battle, acknowledging both their survival and the immense cost. Private Callan knelt beside a fallen friend, tracing the bloodied edge of his uniform with a trembling hand. "You fought bravely," he whispered, voice breaking. "Your courage will not be forgotten." Renwick placed a hand on his shoulder, silent but steadfast, sharing the weight of grief and the unspoken promise to endure. Captain Leontius moved through the ranks, offering words of encouragement, listening to the stories of those who had survived, and acknowledging the courage that had carried them through days of unrelenting conflict. "We have endured because we refused to surrender," he said softly, his gaze sweeping the valley. "We have survived because of courage, because of sacrifice, because of the indomitable human spirit. Remember this, not just the pain, but the bravery that made survival possible." By evening, the valley was quiet, save for the soft crackle of fires and the groans of the wounded. Soldiers huddled around embers, tending to injuries, sharing rations, and offering quiet words of solace. Callan gazed at the horizon, where the fading light painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and crimson. The land was scarred, the memory of battle etched into every ridge, every broken wagon, every scarred tree. And yet, amidst the devastation, life endured, fragile but persistent. Night fell, and the valley became a solemn cathedral of memory. Shadows danced across the ground, cast by the flickering flames of fires still burning, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could persist. Soldiers whispered prayers, recounted stories of fallen comrades, and found solace in shared endurance. Callan lay back on the cold, mud-slick ground, staring at the stars above, distant yet eternal. Hades may watch over this valley, he murmured, voice thick with emotion. But we have faced him, and we endure. Leontius moved silently among the men, observing the quiet resilience that had emerged from chaos. Endurance is the measure of men, he said softly to himself, voice almost lost in the night wind. Not the absence of fear, not the avoidance of death, but the courage to stand in the face of inevitable darkness, and to rise again when all seems lost. That is the legacy of this valley. That is the story of those who survive. As the night deepened, soldiers drifted into uneasy sleep, bodies aching, minds heavy with memories of the relentless combat, the cries of the wounded, and the faces of those who would never return. The valley lay still, a silent witness to courage, sacrifice, and the human will to endure. And amidst the shadows, a fragile ember of hope glimmered, a testament to what humanity could achieve even when surrounded by despair. In the stillness, Callan realized something profound. The measure of men was not found in victories alone, nor in the defeat of enemies, but in the courage to confront darkness, to endure unimaginable hardship, and to honor the lives of those who gave everything in the service of something greater than themselves. Hades' shadow had lingered, ever present, but it had been met with defiance, with resilience, and with the enduring strength of the human spirit. Dawn arrived over the valley in a soft, haunting light, the first true calm after days of relentless violence. The battlefield, though still scarred, seemed almost peaceful in comparison to the chaos that had reigned. Soldiers moved slowly among the remnants of war, tending to the wounded, clearing debris, and taking a moment to honor the fallen. Every sound, the crackle of fires, the rustle of wind through shattered trees, felt amplified, a reminder that life persisted even in the shadow of destruction. Private Callan stood atop a small rise, overlooking the valley. His uniform was torn and stained, muscles stiff, eyes heavy with fatigue, yet burning with a quiet resolve. "We made it," he whispered to Corporal Renwick, who stood beside him, surveying the horizon with solemn intensity. "Yes," Renwick replied, voice low, "but survival is only part of the story. Now comes the reckoning, the memory, and the responsibility to carry what we've endured forward." Captain Leontius approached, his steps measured, armor dented and blackened, face etched to exhaustion but eyes bright with determination. "Men," he said, voice firm but reflective, "we have faced darkness together, confronted despair, and endured what few could imagine. The valley is ours, not because we fought for glory, but because we refuse to surrender, because we honor courage and sacrifice above all else. Remember the fallen, for their bravery forged our survival." The soldiers gathered quietly, forming ragged lines among the broken wagons, shattered siege engines, and scorched earth. Each man carried the weight of his experiences. Friends lost, enemies defeated, and the toll of relentless combat etched into memory. Callan knelt beside a fallen comrade, tracing the bloodied edge of his uniform with trembling hands. "You fought bravely," he whispered. "Your courage will not be forgotten." Renwick placed a steady hand on his shoulder, the unspoken bond of shared endurance and mutual survival anchoring them both. As the sun climbed higher, the valley became a place of reflection and repair. Artillery was restored where possible, muskets cleaned, and wounded soldiers tended. Leontius moved among them, offering words of encouragement, listening to the survivors recount moments of fear, courage, and defiance. "What we endured," he said quietly, "is proof of what humanity can achieve when confronted with the shadow of death. We have been tested, and though the valley bears scars, so too do we bear strength, resilience, and the memory of every life sacrificed in the struggle." By midday, the enemy had vanished entirely. Their forces shattered, morale destroyed. They left behind banners, weapons, and a testament to futility of confronting men who fought with unity, purpose, and courage. Callan scanned the horizon. The valley stretched before him like a map of human endurance, scarred, burned, yet alive. "Hades may have claimed his shadows here," he muttered, voice heavy with emotion. "But we have faced him, and we endure." The soldiers began to mark graves, erect memorials to the fallen, and offer quiet prayers to the gods they hoped had watched over them. Fires flicker across the valley, casting long, dancing shadows over the broken landscape. Callan gazed the night sky, stars distant yet eternal, a reminder that even amidst destruction, some constancy remained. The valley itself seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging both loss and survival, sorrow and resilience. Captain Leontius gathered the surviving officers atop a ridge as dusk settled. "The cost of victory," he said, voice measured and solemn, "is not merely counted in enemies defeated or land secured. It is counted in courage, in sacrifice, and in the lives given so that others might endure. Never forget this. Every life lost is a lesson, every act of bravery a testament to the strength that resides in those who refuse to surrender to darkness." Callan stood silently beside Renwick, absorbing the weight of the moment. The valley was quiet now, the echoes of war replaced by the hum of life cautiously returning. Soldiers moved among the wounded, whispered stories of courage, and shared moments of grief and relief. Even in the shadow of devastation, hope flickered, fragile, yet unyielding. Night descended fully, bringing with it a solemn quiet. Fires burned low, smoke curling into the sky, and shadows danced across the scarred terrain. Soldiers found what rest they could, some sleeping, some sitting quietly, minds heavy with memory, hearts heavy with grief. Callan stared upward at the stars, distant and cold, yet eternal, a reminder that life persists, that courage endures, and that the human spirit can withstand even the darkest trials. In that stillness, the soldiers understood a truth that transcended the battlefield. War is measured not only in victories or losses, but in the courage to stand against inevitable darkness, the endurance to face fear, and the commitment to honor those who gave everything. Hades' shadow had lingered over the valley, yet had been met with defiance, resilience, and unwavering human will. Captain Leontius, standing atop the ridge, spoke one final time, voice carrying over the silent expanse. "Let the memory of this valley endure, not for the destruction it witnessed, but for the courage, sacrifice, and resilience it demanded. We are bound by what we have endured, and those shadows may always linger. So too does the light of the human spirit." Private Callan knelt one last time beside a fallen friend, pressing his hand to the earth. "Rest now," he whispered, voice heavy but resolute. "Your courage lives on in us, in every life saved, in every act of defiance, in every heartbeat that continues despite the darkness." Renwick placed a steady hand on his shoulder, their bond unspoken but absolute, a shared understanding that the legacy of the valley would endure through memory, courage, and honor. As the night deepened, the valley lay quiet, scarred but alive. Fires flickered, shadows danced, and stars burned steadily overhead. Hades' shadow lingered, but it had been faced, challenged, and held at bay by the enduring strength of those who refused to surrender. The story of the valley of sacrifice and of courage would live on, a testament to the cost of war, the resilience of humanity, and the enduring legacy of those who dared confront darkness and survive.